Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank you very much for the beautiful piece we just had. My name is Scott Kennedy. Will be here to help the day run smoothly, I hope. I'll give it sort of a brief introduction to myself. I'm a steering committee member for the Dalai Lama Center for Ethics and Transformative Values. I am also the Dean of Research at the Masdar Institute of Science and Technology. This is a new university based in Abu Dhabi in the UAE, where we're focused on advancing the knowledge and practice of sustainability. So today's session is very near and dear to my heart. To give you a plan for the day, what we'll be doing is we'll have 2 sessions during the day. We'll have a panel 1 in the morning where we'll invite all the speakers to come on soon, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama will join the conversation. After this first morning session, we'll have a break in the afternoon for lunch. I'll be giving some further housekeeping remarks during the day. And then after people come in after lunch, we'll get here by 1 p.m. to sit down, and we'll start our second panel that will run from 1:30 to about 3:30. I'll be introducing the members of the first panel soon, bringing them on the stage, and then we've keeping an ear on when His Holiness will be arriving. I think he's still in the hotel. We may start a few minutes early and then take a short break to introduce him on stage. Maybe he's caught in traffic. We can see what happens. And then we'll start the full session. So right now, I'd like to introduce our panelists to come on stage, and then they'll be sitting down, and we'll start with some opening remarks. So I'd like to introduce the panelists to come on stage. So to start the first morning session, panel 1, the ethics, economy, and environment, I'd like to invite first Professor Edward Delong to come up and give an introduction to the moderator and the speakers. Professor Delong is the Morton and Claire Golder Professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering and the Department of Biological Engineering. He's also a member of the National Academy of Sciences, very well known and very well reputed for all of his work using the modern genomics tools to really understand the basic structure of nature, understand microbial communities in the marine environment, and using very advanced tools to really understand their interactions and take these insights into improving what could be relevant for this first panel, the interaction of humans and the environment. So I'd like to invite him come on the stage and introduce our first panel.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you, everyone, for being here. We would also like to thank His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who's on his way, and Tenzin Priyadarshi, who is the director for the Center for Dalai Lama Center for Ethics and Transformative Values, who made this event possible. And of course, thanks to all our participating panelists. Why are we here today? We live in unique times. So unique, in fact, that some scientists have proposed that over the past several hundred years, we've entered into a new epoch called the Anthropocene. This term Anthropocene refers to our present time, where human population expansion and its resultant environmental consequences are having a profound impact on the chemistry and biology of planet Earth. Today, human population growth and the industries that support it are challenging the environment in unprecedented ways. The physical environment, global chemical balances, and the nature of our biosphere are all changing rapidly. Never before in our planet's history has a single species so quickly and globally impacted the chemistry of Earth's soils, waters, and atmosphere, and the biology and biodiversity of its forests, fields, coastlines, and oceans. As our human population surpasses 7 billion, we're only now beginning to understand in better detail the global consequences of collective human activities. In addition to these environmental concerns, there remains great disparity in the global distribution of resources. 5% of the global population is represented by the United States, yet we consume 25% of the world's energy resources. Despite outstanding technological innovation and advances in agricultural practices, nearly 1 billion people are still hungry. We have to ask hard questions. Exactly how much is too much? Can the Earth support 7 or 9 or 10 billion people with happy lives and good longevity for a long period of time? The challenges humanity now faces transcend any one individual or disciplinary perspective. Our current status and future trajectory can only be fully understood from the perspective of human understandings that include the physical and biological sciences, the social sciences, engineering of all flavors, economics, and ethics. Only the combined perspectives of all these understandings will provide the strategies needed for moving forward with positive outcomes. Our panelists here today have expertise that spans many of these human understandings. They're here today to address some of the most pressing challenges of our times and potential courses for collective action that will move us towards more positive outcomes. This morning, panel 1 will focus on current challenges in the areas of energy, environment, and climate change, and the interrelated scientific, sociological, economic, political, and ethical pathways for moving forward towards positive solutions. This afternoon, panel 2 will examine the challenges of diminishing resources, maintaining global and personal health, environmental and human sustainability, employment with dignity, and the role of humanitarian action for global solutions. So let's begin our first panel today by introducing the speakers, and then we'll proceed onwards with our day. Our first panelist, Kerry Emanuel, will discuss the science and consequences of climate change. Kerry is a professor of atmospheric science in the Department of Earth, Atmospheric, and Planetary Science at MIT. Kerry's research interests focus on tropical meteorology and climate, with a specialty in hurricane physics. He's the author of over 100 peer-reviewed scientific papers and several books, including Divine Wind, The History and Science of Hurricanes, and What We Know About Climate Change. He was named one of the Time's 100 Influential People in 2006 and elected as a member of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences in 2007. In spring 2011, he defended the science of climate change at a United States Congressional House Committee hearing on science and technology. Our second speaker, Rebecca Henderson, will address the interrelationship between energy needs, economy, and the environment. Rebecca is the John and Natty MacArthur University Professor at Harvard University. Professor Henderson is also a research fellow at the National Bureau of Economic Research. Her work explores how organizations respond to large-scale technological shifts, most recently with regard to energy and the environment. She worked with the U.S. Department of Justice in connection with the remedies phase of the Microsoft trial, and in 2001, she was named Teacher of the Year at the Sloan School here at MIT. One of her most recent publications, Accelerating Energy Innovation, Insights from Multiple Sectors, explores the role that public and private policy play in enabling and sustaining swift innovation in a variety of industries, from agriculture and the life sciences to information technology. Our third panelist, Penny Chisholm, will address the emerging topic of geoengineering, a proposed approach for managing global climate change. Penny is the Lee and Geraldine Professor of Environmental Studies in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at MIT. Penny's studies focus on the biology and ecology of ocean life, and in the 1980s, she discovered the most abundant photosynthetic organism on our planet, Prochlorococcus. She was elected as member of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences in 2003. Professor Chisholm has published extensively on the science, policy, and feasibility of ocean fertilization, a scheme proposed by some industrialists to help draw down CO2 from the atmosphere. Recently, Professor Chisholm has co-authored 2 books that aim to teach children and their parents about photosynthesis and the central role it plays in sustaining all life on Earth. Our 4th panelist, Thomas Malone, will discuss new ways to harness collective intelligence to find optimal solutions for today's global challenges. Thomas is the Patrick J. McGovern Professor of Management at the MIT Sloan School and the founding director of the MIT Center for Collective Intelligence. He was also the founder and director of the MIT Center for Coordination Science. Professor Malone teaches classes on organizational design and leadership, and his research focuses on how new organizations can be designed to take advantage of possibilities provided by information technology. The past 2 decades of his research are summarized in his critically acclaimed book, The Future of Work: How the New Order of Business Will Shape Your Organization, Your Management Style, and Your Life. So I'd like to really thank all the panelists for being here today. We're very lucky today to have our moderator here, M. Sanjayan, who's the lead scientist for the Nature Conservancy and a faculty researcher at the University of Montana. His interests are in exploring the nexus between conservation, economic welfare, and human well-being. His scientific work has been published in journals including Science, Nature, Conservation Biology, and Marine Policy. He is a Cato Fellow at the Aspen Institute and a senior advisor to the Clinton Global Initiative. He is currently working on a multi-part series for PBS and National Geographic Television to air in 2014. In 2012, Mr. Sanjayan was named as the Science and Environment Contributor for CBS News. Again, we'd like to thank everyone here. We're going to have to be a little patient as we wait for His Holiness to arrive. There's lots of security issues in terms of transportation and so on. And as soon as he does arrive, we will get started with the panel. Yes, I'm very sorry. John Sterman. John Sterman's up on stage, and he's a professor at MIT in the Sloan School. John won't be speaking in this morning's panel, but he's here to stimulate the discussion, which he does so very well. John's an expert. John is really an expert in systems thinking, in understanding the interrelationships between economy, resource availability, human technologies, and the interplay between all of these things in terms of how feedbacks and loops influence where we get to with respect to sustainability. And he'll be speaking more about that this afternoon. And he's here to help us with the conversation this morning.
I would now like to invite Dean Adele Santos, Dean of the School of Architecture and Planning, to give some welcoming remarks.
Thank you. On behalf of MIT, the students, the faculty, and the administration, it's my honor and pleasure to extend a very warm welcome to His Holiness the Dalai Lama on his return visit to MIT. This has generated great excitement and anticipation on the part of our community, and as you can see, the audience is completely filled. The Dalai Lama Center for Ethics and Transformational Values, which was founded 3 years ago on his last visit to our campus, holds a very special place in our community. The mission fits well with that of MIT, reinforcing our quest to pursue research in service to society as a whole. Holistic education that includes discourse in the development of ethics and humane dimensions seems fundamental to this mission as well. The work of the center is very much appreciated way beyond the boundaries of our campus. The emphasis by the center on multidisciplinary collaboration and approaches to solving pressing issues is very much part of the ethos of MIT. We like to think of ourselves as being part of one university, and we cross the boundaries of disciplines very easily. And I think it's an ethos that makes us quite different from other academic institutions. I think this morning's panel, Ethics, Economics, and Environment, certainly is very close to the concerns of the School of Architecture and Planning. So I'm really delighted also to be here at this moment. And we are very concerned with issues such as degraded environments, growing social inequities, ill-housed populations, and the paucity of resources to really solve these very urgent problems. And we always come back to the whole question of ethical values and fairness in the resolution of these things. So this is really very much about the ethos of the center and the values it espouses. And today's discussion, I think, is going to be memorable. It's certainly urgent and important. And so I would like to thank you for your presence, for spending some days with us, and for, I think, your inspiration and your vision. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Santos, for those remarks. I'll now pass over to our moderator, Emerson Jayan, to continue with the first panel.
Great. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for coming here. And Your Holiness, thank you for being here. Without taking any of your time, I'm going to ask the first speaker, Kerry Emanuel, to start with his presentation. And he'll have about 10 minutes to present, and then we'll open it up for about 10 minutes of discussion amongst all of us. And then we will move on to the next presenter and so on for all four of the people here to participate. We're going to play musical chairs when that happens. Kerry will leave his white chair, and whoever's speaking next will then occupy that seat. And one person will always be off the seat. Okay, so Kerry, go for it.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming, Your Holiness. It's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to speak with you and all of you today. Yesterday, much of the world was riveted when Felix Baumgartner stepped out of a balloon-borne capsule, 127,000 feet, I believe, above the surface, and parachuted to the surface. Before he stepped out of that capsule, he remarked that the world from 127,000 feet made him feel, as a human being, to be extremely small indeed. And I think all of us at one point or more in our lives, perhaps not so dramatically as Felix Baumgartner, has had the experience of feeling very small. And yet, we've come to realize that collectively, in some sense, we've become very large on this planet, and we're beginning to change the planet in ways which may not be beneficial. And I'm here this morning to sort of set the stage by talking about what my field of climate science understands the problem to be. I'd like to begin with a little bit of historical context. It's often mistakenly assumed that our realization that we're changing the climate is a very recent one. In fact, it goes back more than 100 years. The man you see in this photograph, Svante Arrhenius, was a Swedish chemist, a Nobel Prize winner, who was very interested in the fact that we were changing the composition of the atmosphere. And he was perhaps the first to realize that massive combustion of fossil fuels would do that. And he did some calculations. I don't need to tell this audience that back at the turn of the last century, there was no such thing as a digital computer. There were no climate models. But just using basic physics, pencil and paper, he came to the conclusion that you see stated here, that doubling the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere would raise the Earth's temperature by about 4 degrees centigrade. And if we were to increase it fourfold, the temperature would rise by 8 degrees C. Now, he couldn't foresee how quickly the Industrial Revolution would accelerate, so he thought it would take us 1,000 years to do this. But now it looks more like on the order of 100 or 150 years for doubling CO2. So this is this idea that we have the capacity to change our planet is not a very new idea, at least not in the West. Arrhenius's prediction is somewhat borne out, which you can see in this graph. It's a simple graph in which the blue curve is the natural logarithm of the CO2 concentration normalized at some year. And the green curve is a history of the mean surface temperature of the planet. And you can see by the fact that the line varies, it's a squiggly line, that of course there's natural variability of the climate, we all know that. And that natural variability is on many time scales, only some of which you can see in a graph that only spans 100 years or so. But the planet is warming up. Amongst climate scientists, even those who count themselves as skeptical, there is no denial of this fact or even of its relationship to carbon dioxide. The real question is not whether this is happening, but what will be the consequences of this going forward, and should we and can we stop it from happening? So the dilemma for our generation is that if we choose to do something about this, we have to make that choice very soon. We don't have the luxury of waiting, and that's a scientific issue, and it's shown by these two graphs. So the graph at the top shows a projected evolution of the carbon dioxide concentration of the atmosphere. And it's assumed that when the concentration reaches some level, like 450 or 550 parts per million, we'll suddenly stop emitting CO2 for the purposes of this graph. And then nature takes over. And if we burn just about everything so that we get up to well over 1,000 parts per million, you see the curve at the top. The point is that once we stop doing this, it takes a long, long time for this excess carbon dioxide to go away. Nature does take it away. It takes literally thousands of years. And so if we're going to stop this from happening, you can see by those curves, we have to make that decision quite soon. The graph at the bottom shows one of our best estimates of the consequence of that increased greenhouse gas content for the temperature of the surface. And you can see that that recovers even more slowly. So the point is, whatever your perspective on how dangerous this is, if we are going to do something about it, the choice is a choice that this generation has to make. That's simply a scientific fact. One of the consequences that climate scientists are very concerned about is what happens to sea level. I think I skipped a curve. Maybe I didn't. Well, I did. One curve seems to have been left off of this. But right at the moment, we're projecting that in 100 years, sea level will increase by order of a meter or so, which is enough to disrupt a lot of coastal cities. A great deal of the human population of the planet lives very close to sea level. Now, that 1 meter, the purpose of this graph is to show you that 1 meter by long time scale geological standards is a very conservative estimate. So what this graph shows are estimates over history, over geological history of the sea level at various times. That's on the y-axis, versus estimates of what the global mean temperature was. So 20,000 years ago, which is a blink of an eye geologically, there's no doubt the sea level is about 120 meters lower than at present. That's a lot. You could walk from Boston to Provincetown if you wanted to back then, if you could get out from under the ice, that is. Today, the dot in the center represents today, and everything's relative to today in sea level when the mean temperature is about 15 degrees. During the Pliocene period, 3 million years ago, carbon dioxide was actually a little bit less than today, although considerably greater than pre-industrial values. The sea level was some 30 meters higher than today, and that open circle that you see is our projection. And you can see that in geological context, it's a very conservative projection of sea level. Another consequence of changing climate that has us worried is heat waves. We are adapted to a particular climate biologically. We can tolerate big extremes of temperature, but when they start to become too extreme, we begin to suffer. The heat wave in Europe in 2003 is estimated to have killed about 35,000 people. That was an extraordinary event. Even conservative projections of temperature on the planet suggest that this will be commonplace in about 50 years. What was an extraordinary event a few years ago will become fairly commonplace. Hydrological extremes increase with temperature. And this is one of the robust things that we understand about the climate system. You don't need supercomputer models to tell you this. And that means that we expect to see an incidence, increased incidence, both of floods and of drought. This summer, of course, the last few summers in the United States particularly, we've had an illustration of just how seriously drought can affect our economy and, in fact, the world's economy. My own field, as mentioned in the introduction, is hurricanes. I do a lot of work on hurricanes, fascinating phenomena. And we stumbled across this fact. This red curve shows the power generated by hurricanes historically in the North Atlantic Ocean, going back to the end of the 19th century. That's in red. And if you look at the numbers on the right side of the graph, you don't have to know what those units are. You can see that over just in the last 20 or 30 years, that the power of North Atlantic hurricanes has actually more than doubled. That's a big change. The blue curve is ocean temperature in the hurricane breeding places of the North Atlantic, and there's a strong correlation between these two. We understand parts of that, but not all of that correlation, and that's another reason to worry, given how destructive hurricanes are. Something not mentioned as often as it should be is that merely putting carbon in the atmosphere changes the chemistry of the ocean. Some of the carbon dioxide dissolves in the ocean, lowers the pH, increases its acidity. And we have an expert on the panel on this, Penny Chisholm, who you might hear more about this later. But this is a serious concern as the acidity of the ocean increases. It begins to threaten those principally microorganisms that build shells. And this could really seriously change, and there are some indications that it is seriously changing the whole ecology of the ocean. Thank you. Now, amongst people who take security seriously, including our own Defense Department in the United States, this is a very major problem, climate change. So the U.S. Department of Defense issued its last quadrennial defense review in 2010, and I won't read these quotations, I'll let you read them. They're very worried about climate change effect on world stability, because historically food and water shortages have been a major contributor to political destabilization and to armed conflict in the world. So, for example, in the recent Arab Spring, there are of course all kinds of deep political reasons why those rebellions occurred. But there was also a proximate reason, which was a high price of food in that region, driven by drought. And so our Department of Defense is extremely concerned about climate change and are quietly trying to see what can be done about it. So I'm going to leave this as what I consider to be a central question for debate today that I think has caused a lot of difficulty, particularly in the United States. And that is, how can we, by we I mean basically my generation, maybe your generation if you're younger, be persuaded to make material sacrifices, maybe to suffer a slight diminishment of our standard of living, to reduce serious risks of climate change, given that our own generation will not be the primary beneficiaries of our actions. Is it possible for one generation to make sacrifices for future generations, especially if they're more than 1 or 2 generations downstream? Has it been done before? Can it be done? And I'll leave you with those thoughts. Thank you.
Kerry, you gave a very cogent presentation, and you've left us with an obviously important question for the audience and all of us to think about. But just want to begin the dialogue by asking you a simple question. What you're telling us is not new, and you've been working on this for a long time. Why do you think it is so difficult to get this message accepted or understood by the American public or by the general public? Why are people so resistant to this message?
I think the resistance to this message, when looked at in historical context, is nothing particularly new. And one weak analogy, but one that bears some contemplation, is the ramp up in the United States to World War II in the 1930s. It's very interesting to read, for example, Eric Larson's account of the experiences of our ambassador to Germany in the 30s. In the Garden of the Beasts is the name of his book. And it is another instance where it became apparent, I think, certainly by the late 1930s, that there was a real threat in Europe and in other places. And most people who thought about that understood the threat, and yet Americans, and in fact people, not just Americans, were very reluctant to accept that. There was a great resistance to trying to do anything about that during a time when we probably could have done something relatively mild about that. And maybe it took Pearl Harbor to really engage the American public in the idea that that threat had to be dealt with. Now, it's a weak analogy because that threat was real, it was there, and it affected us, not just our children. The difficulty about this threat is if we don't do anything about it, we're not going to suffer very much. Not me, not somebody in his 50s. It's evolving slowly. And that's what makes it new. And I don't know, I'm not an historian. I'd love to hear from professional historians if we can identify a time in human history when one generation conscientiously reacted to a threat whose only manifestation would be several generations away. I can't think of an instance, but maybe some of you can.
Maybe I can ask Your Holiness to maybe give a comment here in terms of thinking about bad news versus good news, and whether bad news travels slower and is much more difficult for people to accept and then make change.
My own case, when we were in Tibet, no idea about the importance of ecology. I always tell people that in Tibet, every water is very sweet.
You can drink.
You can drink. After I reached India, and also some different countries, then they say this water cannot drink because polluted. And then as a result of meeting some, ecologist, environmentalist, scientist, then I learned, this is something very, very serious matter. And firstly, unlike violence or war strike in our mind immediately, bleeding, dying, and starvation, these things. When we see pictures from some African area, starvation or malnutrition, right?
Malnutrition.
And India also. These are very, very immediately struck in our mind. Then environment degenerate, not that kind of visible, invisibly. Worse and worse. Once we actually, as you mentioned, I think when actually we felt
Experience
some sort of difficulties, eyes or breathing these things, then maybe too late. So therefore, after I learned these things from experts, then I realized this is a very, very serious matter. So then, since that many decades, I always point out that we have the responsibility to take care about our own planet. This is the only our home. If something really happened, seriously happened here, then there's no other planet we can move. Moon, look in blue sky at night, very beautiful. 1,000 years, the poetry survey.
The poets.
Poets, they mentioned that beauty of the moon. If we really go there, suddenly horrible. So this is the troubled world, no matter how sort of trouble, but it's the only home. Therefore, we have to take sort of serious care as our own room. I think once our room, own room, due to sort of cold and some furniture burn, how can it's your own sort of home. Oh. So like that, so we have to sort of think seriously. So all this through education. Then also, I think this is very much related with, again, I think self-centered attitude. Then, yes, at least my generation, no problem. There's a more sense of concern of others' well-being. And yesterday also, as I mentioned, our children, grandchildren, grandchildren, then grandchildren like that. So we have the responsibility to think about their future, their life. That's as a human being. You see, even animal, to some extent, the animal parent really very carefully think about their own youngsters' survival or properly grow like that. So we are human beings. We have this marvelous intelligence, this brain. So we have to use that brain and should have vision, long vision. So I feel everything, education. So like you, tell more. And then media people also, you see, should make clear presentation. The preservation of our climate or our environment is our own interest, not something like religious. And the religion also is, of course.
Moral duty.
What's the day? I don't know. I don't know proper word. I don't know. Firstly, my English vocabulary was limited. And then secondly, in getting older, my English also getting older, so it's difficult.
So protection of environment is not a matter of luxury.
So it is a question of our own survival. So everything is dependent on education. So media people, and also I think religious people. One time, one organization, I think mainly in Hong Kong, about environment. I said they give me one sort of responsibility, mission work, all this sort of their document about environment. They want put in the desk of His Holiness Pope John Paul II. So I did that. One my friend, he said they want this document put in front of you.
No.
I put it. Whether he read or not, I don't know. So religious leaders, I think to some people, they say, I think the message from religious sort of leaders may be more effective. And then other kind of people, of course, the scientists, those specialist scientists, is make clear and with sort of detailed data.
Data. No.
That's very convincing. Very.
Maybe you and I should have a road show together.
So that's my view. These is very, very much related with wisdom or knowledge, the realistic sort of look, and then also the moral sort of principles concerned about well-being of others.
Yeah.
Usually you see, forget these things, just think me, 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 me. Almost sometimes people consider whole 21st century is century of me. How can? So that I think we should educate people. We are social animal. We are part of that humanity. So each one have the moral responsibility for your own interest to think more about others' well-being. Not just as a short sort of lecture, but systematic way from education field, from kindergarten up to university level, educate. These usually I call secular ethics right from the beginning. Then I think our intelligence get some kind of proper
guidance.
That's me.
Okay, thank you. I wanted, Tom, if you could just, so you get 30 seconds, because you created this thing called the Center for Collective Intelligence, and yet His Holiness talked about the self-centered attitude as an impediment to Kerry's message. Do you see, is there something you can offer us, just as a closing while the next speaker comes up?
So I think it's a very interesting connection. I think people sometimes believe that collective intelligence means our individual selves will be suppressed in the collectiveness of the whole group. I don't think that's always necessary. I think it's possible, for instance, to have collective intelligence emerging from interactions among people who are each selfish. In fact, many people would say that a free market is an example of that, an example of how a lot of selfish people can interact in such a way that some globally coherent good outcomes arise. So I don't think it's necessary to become selfless in order to have collective intelligence. But I think there are some really intriguing possibilities for what kinds of collective intelligence we could exercise on our planet if more of us are able to transcend the preoccupation with ourselves that I believe His Holiness is referring to.
Thank you so much. I'm going to introduce the next speaker just briefly again for his Holiness and those of you who are here. So our second speaker is Rebecca Henderson, who is going to focus on energy needs, the economy, and the environment. She is the John and Natty MacArthur University professor at Harvard University and a research fellow at the National Bureau of Economic Research. Her work is exploring how organizations respond to large-scale technological shifts, most recently with regard to energy and the environment. Rebecca.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Your Holiness. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been asked to summarize approximately 25 years of my research in 10 minutes. So this presentation will be very abbreviated, but there are many people who could help you with these issues if you'd like more information, of course. I'd like to begin with a fact that is obvious, but I still find startling. The population of the world has tripled in my father's lifetime, in your lifetime, and doubled in my own. This has created issues. Most strikingly, humans seek natural resources. This is the fish caught on the Georges Bank, the most productive fishing ground in the world. It was fished out in the 1990s. Basically, humans took all the fish, and it still has not recovered.
Is ask the question why the graph is sharply down. Is it because
they took all the fish? They ran out of fish. And the very high peak, they took all the very young ones, so there was no children, so they took all the fish. Not a good thing. And the world's fishing populations are forecast to collapse by 2050, so within the next 30 or 40 years. So we take a lot of natural resources and we generate a lot of waste. My colleague, Professor Emanuel, talked about the greenhouse effect. This is showing that what we're doing is a roulette wheel. We are emitting all this carbon and other forms of waste, and we're not entirely sure of the impact it will have on the world. It may have a relatively benign effect. It may have really very extreme effects. So this is an issue. So all we need to do is transform the world's economy. We need... We need to go from a world where resources are cheap and waste is free, we can basically just throw things away, to a world where resources and waste are properly priced. I'm an economist. I believe if we understood the costs of what we were doing, that would enormously help the way in which we run our economy. So this is easy to put on a graph. Fortunately, it is completely possible. I don't say easy, I say possible. We have a fair sense of the technologies that would enable us, for example, to take the carbon out of the world's energy system. We believe that it would cost perhaps on the order of 2 to 3% of GDP. That's about $230 a head for every man, woman, and child in the United States. In the United States, assuming we would pay more because we have more money, it would be about $1,000 a head. That is less than half of what the United States spends on its army, and only an eighth of what we spend on healthcare. Indeed, if the US were to have a healthcare system more like that of Switzerland or Germany or France, it would cost about half. Healthcare outcomes would be roughly equivalent, and we'd have the money to pay for this. It's also possible, and I believe this, that once we started to try and innovate in this way, in fact, costs would come down. Once we started to try and really do this at scale, we would learn a great deal about how to do it better, and it would be cheaper. I can't guarantee that, but every other industry where we've really started to invest in change, costs have come down. This is an example from the cost of solar panels, showing the very dramatic reduction over the last 20 years. I think we could expect similar cost reductions in other technologies. The bad news is, although I believe it to be both technologically and economically possible, it's a human problem that we're facing. And I've spent my career working with large firms and trying to change them, and that's really hard. And now we're talking about changing an entire economic system. One of the issues I think it's very important to be aware of is that many proponents of the current system, many people who say, you know, be careful, we're doing really well, we don't want to change it, believe that the current system is intrinsically moral, that the economic system we have has brought, I've said here, prosperity and hope to billions of people. GDP per head, and these are figures from the World Bank, in the last 30 years has not tripled. It's gone up 6 times. And so it's very easy to say, oh, business is bad, capitalism is bad, we're destroying the planet. But we are creating wealth and hope for billions and billions of people. And I think that as we think about change, it's very important to be respectful of those who believe, as business people, they are doing a very good thing. And that's very important. It's also important to remember that this is not change at the margin. This is not saying, would you just recycle a few bottles? This is saying, get rid of fossil fuels, which is what has driven economic growth. The fundamental driver of economic growth is cheap energy, and that's come from fossil fuels. Even now, renewables are, depending on how you count them, only, say, 11% of the total energy mix, and most of that is hydro. So this is a very large shift. The energy sector is about 10% of the US economy. I believe it to be roughly that, a little larger for the world. That's enormous, but again, not impossible. If you think about World War II, which again is a useful analogy, we shifted the economy much more than that in World War II. So it can be done. $1,000 a head a year, I mean, I frame it this way because it doesn't sound like that much money, right? It's $300,000 million a year just in the US. And $1,000 million a year in the world. So it is a significant amount of money. And this is and we have talked about the fact that it is difficult to benefit the future. If you are a business person making decisions about what to invest in, you typically use what's called a discount rate. That is, you assume that if I have money next year, it's less valuable than money this year. Most companies use a discount rate on the order of 8%. If you apply an 8% discount rate to, say, $1,000, 30 years from now, it's worth almost nothing at all. So one of the problems we face is our economic system on its day-to-day decision-making doesn't really value the future 30 or 40 years out. So in addition to that, the people who will be most hard hit by these changes are people who are not right here and often look different from us, which is a huge issue. And another problem is that the costs of change are concentrated and immediate. If I'm a coal miner, I don't have very much money, I'm thinking, you know, you want to take my livelihood away. And that's a real problem. So the question is, what can be done? I'm hoping you have many good ideas on this front. The easy answer is we need appropriate regulation of the world's economy. So if we had accurate prices, if I knew that every time I emitted a ton of carbon dioxide, that was imposing costs on the future and on my fellow human beings, that would be enormously helpful. And we also need political support for large-scale innovation. We also need the ability to put such a regime in place. No politician in the United States right now can propose such a scheme because they believe they won't get elected. So we need widespread political support in order to put these things in place. So I think there are some sources of hope. Decarbonizing the world's economy is eminently technologically possible at completely acceptable cost. For me, a source of hope is the world's 1,000 largest corporations are 30% of the world's economy. That might seem strange as a source of hope. I know it makes some people nervous. I sometimes believe, however, that there is a real possibility we could reach the senior leadership of 1,000 firms or 500 and persuade them that it was really in their best interest to lobby and to work for a different kind of economy. That no one stands to gain from an economy that's under enormous stress, that this is really a body that could play a huge difference. And I think there's increasing consensus that business as usual may have unacceptable social and environmental costs. So I'll close by telling you my personal source of hope. I will be teaching a class next year at the Harvard Business School called Reimagining Capitalism, which is about how we could build an economic system that is capitalist, that is driven by the innovation and dynamism and competition that has generated so much growth, but that doesn't destroy the social and environmental capital on which we rely. I taught this class very quietly to 30 students last year and announced it to the whole student body this year. And more than 350 students, that's nearly half of the second-year class at the Harvard Business School, said they would like to take this. So I'm very encouraged that there's a lot of enthusiasm and engagement among young managers who are going to be running the firms in the future to deal with these issues.
Just prompt one question that your discussion, that you, please, of course.
The last year, you carried this sort of class quietly. Why? Some opposition? Or not? You yourself not very sure?
Good question.
I am an engineer and an economist. I sit on the boards of large public companies. To talk about reimagining capitalism among people in suits and to suggest, as I do when I teach, that we should be managing firms as much from an ethical and moral basis as from a financial basis is hard. The business people I meet want to have an ethical conversation. They know things are happening in the world. But we have built a system where it is considered inappropriate, even unethical, to talk about not making the best I can of my business and managing for shareholder value. And I think one of the most important things we can do is create a space where people can say, yes, I'm a good business person, and I'm responsible to my shareholders, and I'm a fiduciary responsibility is the technical term in English. But I also can build a business that serves my children and my children's children and creates a world in which we all want to live. And how to have that conversation in public is still a difficult thing. So it's a great question. Yes, I was very nervous. And it was the reaction of those 30 students that persuaded me that this was the right thing to do.
Wonderful.
So what I was going to try and ask you when you gave your presentation is that for your system to work, it seems like everyone has to be in it. Every country, every nation has to have skin in the game because climate change is a global problem and all of us contribute to it, obviously in different ways, but all of us do. Can one nation move forward and still reap the benefits, or does it automatically imply, to reimagine the economy as you are proposing to do, does it imply that everyone has to do it together?
So there's good news and bad news. The bad news is to really make progress at the kind of speed I think the science suggests, it would be immensely helpful if the whole world started to move tomorrow. And it's also bad news in that if I make the investments now to reduce my carbon output, as Kerry said, I will in my lifetime not see the benefit. My children and people living in low-lying areas where there's climate instability will reap the benefit. Here's the good news, however. Everything I think I know about technical change, and I was a professor at MIT for more than 20 years, it's what I've studied my whole career, leads me to believe that once you start focused investment in an area, it gets much easier and much cheaper than we think. So that I believe if several of the major nations, the obvious ones would be the US and China, the two largest emitters, the two most dynamic economies, if we were to make minor investments, the US spent $1 billion a day in Iraq and Afghanistan. The whole fundamental investment in basic climate research was less than $3 billion a year for years. If we seriously invested, I think, and business knew that a price for carbon was coming, I think the costs would fall enormously. I think we would see jobs, I think we would see infrastructure renewal, I think we would see a sense of hope and growth that is one of the things we really need. So I think there's enormous potential here. And to say, oh, we can't move until the whole world moves, is really a cop-out. Okay.
So, John, I'll come to you in a second, but Your Holiness, I wondered if you might reflect on that, this notion that, you know, one person has to jump first. And the courage it takes, because your original question to Rebecca had to do with this courage, whether she was willing to take that step or not. And I wondered, when you come to something this challenging, you know, who takes the first step?
In heaven. Logically, say some sort of something which humanity facing difficulties or problems. We ourselves have to find ways to solve that. No one else. So I think initiative, logically, few individuals or few companies, and then the few nations. Then, as you mentioned, there is some kind of this is the realistic approach. So short term, maybe lose something, but long term, that's a very, very healthy way because of the economic field to grow. So then, I think others will follow. So in any way, I really also admire such people here, really thinking seriously and already try to implement these things. Wonderful, wonderful. I want to on the conversation because of sense of concern for others' well-being or compassionate sort of attitude. Quality service language.
He always wants to return to the point you raised about emergence of collective consciousness and how whether the emergence of that really is dependent upon individuals letting go of self-interest. And His Holiness wants to bring up, often people tend to think that taking care of others, having a concern for others, kind of imply that you should not be thinking about your own needs.
No. Altruism does not mean your own interest forget. No. Actually, long run, your own interest is achieved maximum way if you take care of others. That's why usually I mentioned, since many decades, we are selfish, but should be wise selfish rather than foolish selfish. Taking care of others' well-being, you get a maximum benefit. Just to forget other, or worse thing, exploit other, cheating other, telling lies, or bully. Ultimately, you will be loser. So extreme selfish, self-centered attitude is actually self-destruction. So all these things, education, awareness, holistic and long-term reality, so that I want to make so that
I want to share with you.
Let's share with you.
So
If someone telling me, you see, to practice altruism, that actually goes against my own interest, then I won't listen. But think realistically and wider perspective, I develop full conviction. They take care of also the human brothers and sisters. That's the best way to get your own interest, the maximum way. That I want. And then I just want, of course, these matters, I'm a completely ignorant person. But I noticed one time in Stockholm, in the city, in the city, one river. Some my friend told me, I think that maybe 10 years ago, maybe. So my friend told me, before the fish in that river completely disappeared because of pollution. When I was there, the second or third time, they said, now fish began to appear. That does not mean whole sort of industries around that river has collapsed. No, collapse means
Destroyed.
not destroyed.
Closed down.
Closed down, but still carrying. But you see, they adopt some technology, less sort of affect environment. Then also in Germany, this is some sort of new factories. They say, they take the full care about the environmental consequences. So seems, then I felt, there is a way, without damaging, without stop, they sort of making money. At the same time, the less damage. So that's, I think, so now your presentation also, they reconfirm that. It's really a hopeful sign. Wonderful. Now the biggest problem, as what I think you mentioned, population increasing. Now that's really headache. Yeah, really headache. if you're forced to stop that, also, you see, not right. You just let
it go. Let it explode.
Like one small room, the room itself, capacity only 5 people. Then the number reaches 10, and how can manage like that? So that's the reality. Of course, as we mentioned, I have no worry. I already now 77-year-old, so next, I think, 20 years, 30 years, I think not much sort of concern, not much danger. And then afterward, after 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, I think we'll be very, very serious. And very strict sort of inhuman way birth control, that also not good. But through education, some kind of sort of non-violent way of birth control, I think very necessary. Best thing I often tell Joe, there should be more nuns, more nuns. That's the non-violent way of, because of the population control. I think population, really the population sort of increasing. That is, I think, a very, very serious matter, serious matter. Then this is, I think, your idea, the economic development, no, with moral some principle or something, realistic approach. I think I found in India, at least with some Indian business and also leaders, they often told me the existing sort of economy sort of structure sooner or later will bring disaster. So they have to think, have to sort of find, according to their own sort of area. Huge country, hot climate. So all these, they have to find a realistic approach about sort of economic development. Perhaps, I think. Have you been in India?
I have. Oh. And I think there are thousands of men and women inside businesses right now starting to build this kind of economy. If I'd had another 10 minutes, we would have done some concrete examples. But there's men and women of enormous courage thinking about how to build an economy that is creating wealth and yet not destroying the environment. It's eminently possible.
And Brazil.
Brazil, India, China, forgive me, but there's lots of interesting stuff there.
Very good.
Here in the US, in Europe in particular, everywhere in the world, there's very exciting activity happening. Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, I would like to have the next speaker. Annie, if you could come up. Do you want to make comment? And while you're getting your slides going, you had a quick comment, John.
Yeah, so I think Rebecca is entirely correct about the basis for hope here, and I actually think there's even more good news than Rebecca indicated. One concrete piece of good news is that not only will the costs of these alternative technologies for energy and other resources come down as we build scale, but there are already opportunities to make enormous reductions in our emissions today that are profitable by the standard traditional short-term measures that corporations use. I'll give you one very quick example right from our own campus, where several years ago we renovated one of our lab buildings, not an old building, and at a cost of $150,000 once, we reduced its energy use by $350,000 per year forever at then prevailing energy prices, and they're higher today. You may ask, how is that possible? Well, nobody had really paid much attention to the controls for heating and cooling. The building was drawing steam to heat itself and chilled water to cool itself at the very same time. This is silly, and you save an enormous amount of money by eliminating that. Now, the question, the really deep question is, how could that situation come to exist? And that gets us, I think, to the deeper questions that come up around how people look at the situation. And what we find, as I talk to the senior leaders in organizations, as Rebecca does, many of them most sincerely desire to create a better world and to spend their working lives in an enterprise that does not destroy the future. But they don't know how to do it. And if they don't know how to do it, they aren't going to be looking for those opportunities. So what we have to do is confront this question of how do we engage people in that opening up of their eyes without simply causing them to become discouraged and despairing, which is so often the response to information such as we're hearing today.
Thank you. So, Richard, thank you. Richard Branson often talks about building a company like there is a tomorrow, and I like that line, building it like there is a tomorrow. So our third panelist is Penny Chisholm. Penny is the Lee and Geraldine Martin Professor of Environmental Studies in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering here at MIT. Her studies, however, focus on the oceans, and she also writes children's books aimed at education, which is an interesting point there. You're going to focus your discussion here on the emerging topic of geoengineering and the proposed engineering approaches to trying to manage global climate change.
Thank you.
Penny.
I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me, and it's an honor to be here with you today. So my first slide shows two images of the Earth. The one on the left is to remind us how special we are. And the one on the right I've extracted from The Economist. There was an article on this Anthropocene that Ed Delong talked about. And that article said, basically the tagline was, humans have changed the Earth, now we have to change the way we think about it. And it was advocating that we need to start thinking about being able to geoengineer the Earth, and that is take control of the Earth's major processes, the climate and everything. And in case I don't get to the end of my talk, I'll start out by saying I think it's a bad idea. And I think that we don't understand enough, nor can we understand enough about the complexity of our world to be able to control it one parameter at a time. And I should also I will also add that there are people who I respect who disagree with me. So this is open for debate. So first of all, let's just define what is meant by geoengineering. The key words are, it's intentional. And it's planetary in scale. It has to be very large scale. And what people argue, well, we've already geoengineered the Earth. We have completely changed the face of the Earth, and we're changing the climate. But the difference is that that was an unintentional consequence of actions, and this is intentional. So this idea of geoengineering has been around for a while, but it's only in the last decade that it has really progressed to being not a fringe idea, but a mainstream idea. And it has been endorsed, research on it has been endorsed by the National Academy of Sciences, the Royal Society, and as you can see from the graph on the right, the number of scientific papers on the concept has increased dramatically in the last even 5 years. So this is now something that is on the table, particularly to do research on it, to see whether it is something we should consider. So this slide shows you the the various things that have been proposed that might be implemented to change the climate, they basically fall into two different categories. One is trying to collect the carbon that's in the atmosphere, draw down the carbon from the atmosphere that we've put there from burning fossil fuels by various means. And the other is to actually control the temperature of the Earth. I can point on here. Oh, you can't see it. Well, anyway, on the upper right is to actually control the temperature of the Earth directly by manipulating clouds or injecting, on the left there is injecting sulfur particles into the atmosphere to mimic the effects of volcanoes that would reflect the sun's heat. And so in the ocean there, you can see there's a circle. I've circled that. That is what's known as ocean iron fertilization. The idea there is to add nutrients to the ocean to stimulate the microscopic plants, the phytoplankton, which are my passion. And if in stimulating their growth, get them to draw CO2 out of the atmosphere. And yes, no, sure. Ah, okay.
His Holiness is asking why there's steams coming out there, but not on this side. The smokes.
Okay. On the left there, that is collecting the fossil fuel carbon dioxide and injecting it down into the rock. And this here on the right, on the ocean, is, yeah, and that one is proposing to generate more clouds from ocean water to reflect the sunlight. Okay. And unfortunately, I don't have time to go through all of these, so I'm only going to focus on the ocean and the stratosphere and the particles in the atmosphere. The one thing I would say about this slide is that it has reforestation, see the trees, as geoengineering, and I don't consider that geoengineering. That's restoring the trees that we have cut down. So I think if I designed this slide, that would not be there. That's a good thing. Trees are a good thing. Cutting trees down is not. That we know. Okay. So now just briefly, I will talk about this ocean fertilization proposal, because that is something that I actually know something about. I'm not really an expert on these other dimensions of geoengineering. So what most people don't really appreciate is that the oceans do half of the photosynthesis on Earth. The microscopic plants in the oceans, the phytoplankton, draw roughly as much CO2 out of the atmosphere as the plants on land. They're part of the natural global carbon cycle. And you can see on the left here, I've shown the burning of fossil fuels, which is what's increasing this CO2 in the atmosphere. So the question people have asked is, can we fertilize the ocean, fertilize these phytoplankton with iron, which happens to limit their growth in certain regions of the ocean, and have them draw more carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere? That would be that extra arrow there. And to make a long story short, 11 experiments have been done to demonstrate that So scientists have done a number of experiments that have shown that, yes, you can add iron to the ocean. On the left here, you can see where Alaska is. This is the Pacific Ocean, and I've circled this little patch that is a false color image from satellites, but it shows a patch of ocean where that was fertilized with iron, where the phytoplankton grew more, and so we know this is possible.
So this is not land.
This is in the ocean, and 11 experiments have been done like this, but. So we know that these plants are limited by nutrients. That's part of the system. That's what controls the system. And you can add them and make them grow faster. But in doing so, you change the entire food web. You change the entire ecology of the ocean. We also know from simple models and calculations that in order for this to have any effect on carbon dioxide, you would have to fertilize the entire ocean, so or a significant fraction of the ocean. So it's really the risks are enormous. It's irreversible, and the gains are questionable. And yet, it is still being discussed as a possibility. And I can, if we have time, I can tell you about a recent thing that has happened off the Pacific. In fact, it just broke in The Guardian today. A capitalist from California has fertilized 10,000 square miles of Pacific Ocean with 100 tons of iron, and is claiming that he will increase the fisheries and that this can be traded on a carbon market. So this is not going away. We can talk about that more.
So you have lists, both the risks being enormous and irreversible. So are they connected, or why would you list irreversible as a separate implication?
They're connected and separate. By irreversible, it means that once you add the iron into the ocean and you fertilize, there's no turning back from that. You can't take it out. Like some of the other schemes that have been proposed, the manipulation has a temporary lifetime unless you keep doing it. In this case, once you have done it, there's no going back because it's in the ocean. The risks there's a number of risks of unintended consequences, some of which we know that if you create a phytoplankton bloom, it actually consumes oxygen from the waters. And we see that in what are so-called dead zones in coastal waters, where you have algal blooms in coastal waters and the fish die because that consumes the oxygen. The same phenomenon would go on in the open ocean. It's just that we would not see that because it would go on. Okay, I have one more minute, so I'm going to go skip some slides. I will talk about just this stratospheric particle injection up there on the right is something that is now being actually, research is being done on that, and there's a project in the UK called the SPICE project, Stratospheric Particle Injection for Climate Engineering, that was scheduled to actually do a pilot test this summer, but it was canceled because one of the scientists involved had a patent on the delivery device for the particles, and that was felt that would be a conflict of interest, and so So that is simply to say that there's a huge economic dimension to this that I don't have time to go into, but there So skipping ahead, the arguments that people are making for this research on geoengineering is that we aren't doing anything about global warming. We must have an emergency plan in case things really go bad. And also, another argument being used is that nations could start to use weather modification as a weapon, or climate modification as a weapon. So we must be doing research on it.
And the emergency to Zara land on a double forest, and then Namshi, you are tired
Yes.
The other arguments are that doing this research will advance basic understanding, but we can do that anyway without justifying it under the guise of geoengineering. And the other interesting thing is that recent studies have shown that people are more willing to believe in global warming if they think there's a technological fix. If they think they don't have to make sacrifices and there's a quick fix, they're more willing to believe it's happening. And that's an interesting sideline. But the arguments against it, and my primary argument, is that any experiments that you do on a small scale do not scale up. The results cannot be scaled up. The Earth system is too complex, and you have emergent properties at all levels, and it cannot be scaled up. So we aren't going to know what will happen, and I think to take that risk with our planet is too great when we know there's a solution at the root cause. So that's my conclusion here is that I think we know what the problem is. We know there are solutions to get at the root cause. The risks of trying to manipulate the planet are enormous. And I'll just end with a plug for my children's books, which I've written with a children's book writer, but simply because I think your point about education, I feel that if people really understood the majesty of this planet and the complexity of the biosphere, they would be much more cautious about talking about fiddling with the temperature, etc. So what we've tried to do with these books is cultivate, they're written in the voice of the sun, who is describing the role of photosynthesis in plants on Earth. And we've tried to cultivate awe while at the same time cultivating basic scientific understanding. And I'll just end with my favorite image of our planet.
Very good. It can live without us. Oh, yes. It can live without us. Certainly, yes.
Yes, but we can't live without it.
But we cannot live without that. That's true. Very true. Yeah. That's why very much C is concerned.
Yeah. I think of it as, if we think of the biosphere as a living organism that is supporting us, I think we respect its complexity. I've spent my life studying a single species of phytoplankton in the oceans, and the more I learn about it, the more I realize that we don't know anything. True. Well, we know a little bit.
So Penny, let me just prompt one question. When you put the slide up, the one that shocked me the most was this notion of rogue nations. So if I was in a small country like the Maldives, for example, and I was powerless to do anything about climate change, then I would say, you know what, well, I can't convince all of you to stop emitting. I'm going to develop a device, and I'm going to deploy it. And maybe if you're a tiny country, America and the EU will put pressure to stop it. But what happens if you now are a slightly bigger country, a Pakistan or Russia? what's the notion about countries just saying, this is such a big problem for us, we're going to disappear without it, and we're just going to do it?
It's a problem, yeah. I mean, and that is one of my biggest worries, actually. And the thing I just mentioned, that the story broke after I prepared my slides, or I would have talked more about it. But this dumping of iron off of the coast of British Columbia is in violation of two statutes in the London Dumping Convention. It's illegal, what has just happened. And yet it's happened, and I don't know enough about the law of the sea to know what the consequences of that are. But this is a big concern. These technologies are not that complicated at all. Right. They're not that complicated, and so it's true that. That's why I put sleeping giant in the title.
And we should point out that, again, as you said, reforestation or painting roofs white. Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of benign geoengineering activities that we can do, but you're talking about planetary engineering. Yes. Your Holiness, this notion of we've already interfered with the planet, and now we're going to interfere in a way to try to fix the problems we've done. It clearly creates consternation for some people, but at the same time, maybe it is a solution.
Whether we can really solve these problems or not, really, time comes, we have to make an attempt. That's how I feel. And I felt, I reflect on the failure of Copenhagen summit because they concerned some sort of nations. They consider their own interest, national interest, is the most important rather than global interest. So these are, again, you see the lack of sense of global responsibility. Ultimately, related with self-centered, individually self-centered. The national level, again, self-centered. So now these are global issues, isn't it? Something happened. Every nation will suffer. So we have to think more about common sort of interest, common responsibility rather than national interest. I think China did get a good job from it. Took it to my sister. Kashik myself, Kashik Gusaswich. They could do in the deal. Middle Java. Took it in which has on to one. 2 months you shall marva. Come to Parading. The black and white is marva.
So, His Holiness's point is, you talked about how there are two perspectives on this whole approach, and whether or not approaches such as this will lead to anything. So His Holiness was saying that, quite often...
At the beginning, you mentioned that. So I immediately felt there's always... We cannot decide on the concept of black and white. Always middle. Difficult, but make attempt. Some achievement possible. But that attempt solve everything. That also extreme. So that's my view.
It's worth trying.
Yes, really.
Then this is
wonderful.
Then geoengineering is good.
Oh, this is do.
Korea, but cheating geo the So His Holiness was wondering that, of course, we cannot solve everything, but there could be certain approaches we can kind of restore certain limited aspects.
As other speakers has mentioned, yes. So the global warming, certainly, to some extent, our own sort of behavior, our own way of life. really make definite sort of contribution for that. In that respect, if we think, if we realize that, and accordingly, modify, then we'll reduce. But that again does not mean everything is controlled through that way. That also extreme. So global warming, I think sometimes in some part of the world, a very hot climate, like Siberia, one time. Now then, change completely. Now again, it's the global warming. So that's beyond our control. We have to accept that. The other day, I also mentioned, one occasion, the meeting with scientists. One presentation, our whole galaxies, you see, moving a certain direction. Another galaxies is the same sort of direction is coming. So once that meet, some explosion, big explosion, definitely will come. Not only climate change, but whole sort of universe, some sort of disturbances, definitely. But for the moment, we have no concern about that. After several billions of years, so no worry. But like that, it's a nature process. Go like that. These are beyond our control, isn't it? I think global warming also, you say, I think some nature process, go like that.
I think you're absolutely right about that. When you look at the long term here, the Earth is going to change, regardless of our burning fossil fuel or any of that. And if humans are alive at that point, they will probably, I mean, it's going to change more dramatically than it is changing now. And so one could argue that we should start now studying how we could control that. But
it is our moral responsibility to look.
Yes, we cannot be against doing research. That's
well, I think the other point that Your Holiness made is this notion of things not being black and white. And I think with many environmental problems, as well as solutions to the problems, we tend to react in black and white. It's either good or bad. And sometimes, you know, it's not that, very often, I think you can't simply think in that duality.
Good and bad sigmida. Can solve everything. Or since you cannot solve everything, so better do nothing. That is extreme. That's one extreme. Then hope we can control everything. That also extreme. So between there. Try. Let us try. That's the only way.
Fair enough.
But we have to be cautious. I said but we need to be cautious as we try.
Cautious is
carefully.
Not cautious. I think I prefer the realistic.
He's very
realistic.
Huh? It's like take the risky way.
Cautious means even you can do something too much cautious, not good. Go ahead.
I'm going to ask, just because I know we're running a little bit long on time, we have one more speaker, and the last speaker, I'm going to have Tom come up, please. Thank you, Tom. Tom, I'm sorry, but I'm going to ask you to go fairly rapidly, but do wait while the translator is translating. Okay. Thank you.
Should we start?
Yes, so let me quickly do a quick intro. Sorry, I'm falling back here. Tom is the Patrick J. McGovern Professor of Management at MIT Sloan School and the founding director, as I said before, of the Center for Collective Intelligence. And he teaches organizational design and leadership. And today he's going to be speaking about new ways to harness our collective intelligence to find optimal solutions for today's global challenge and the big one we have in front of you. Thanks, Tom.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Good morning, Your Holiness. So I think it's clear from the presentations we've just heard that global climate change is perhaps one of the biggest problems facing we humans today. It's really complicated, really big, and really hard. Now, there is, however, I think, one reason at least for optimism, and that is that we now have a way of approaching big, complicated, hard problems that wasn't even possible 15 years ago. If you think of examples like Wikipedia and Google and the communities that have developed open source software, it's now clear that we can, in those cases, harness the collective intelligence of thousands of people all over the world to work on really big, hard, complicated problems at a scale and with a degree of collaboration that was never possible before. So the question is, could we use this crowdsourcing approach to help figure out what to do about global climate change? Could we, for instance, have thousands of people all over the world help figure out better and in more detail how to do the things Rebecca talked about? Or could they come up with ideas for other things we might try that Rebecca hasn't thought of yet? To try to answer these questions, we've created a central repository on the web called the Climate CoLab. It's a place where people can come together from all over the world to create proposals for what we should do about global climate change. These proposals can include any ideas people have about things like political changes or technological changes or economic changes. And in addition to the ideas that these people put into the proposals, they also, we think, is important to have the proposals be grounded in the actual physical and economic reality we face. So each of the proposals at the global level needs to include some quantitative assumptions about what emission reductions would result from the actions being proposed. Then, built into the online platform is a computer simulation model developed by John Sterman and a number of other people that predicts the likely impacts of the changes proposed on things like temperature change, sea level rise, and various kinds of economic costs. We have already over 3,900 people as registered members of this online community, including students, software developers, environmentalists, and people from many other walks of life. Over 44,000 people from almost every country in the world have visited the site. And in addition to all the other people in the global crowd, we also have some of the world's leading climate change researchers involved, not only the ones shown here, but a number of others involved as judges and as advisors to various parts of the project. We believe that this allows the experts to bring the best current knowledge into the discussion on the website, and it also lets them help evaluate the different ideas proposed by different people. Now, for the last 3 years, we've had annual contests where these people compete with proposals for which are the best ideas. For instance, in last year's annual contest, one of the winning proposals was actually a combination of the ideas in the 3 winning proposals from the previous year. Another winning proposal came from a team of people who met each other on the Climate CoLab site. That team included an environmental activist from Florida, a sociology professor from Minnesota, and a climate change researcher from Australia. There were also winning proposals from people in India and Nigeria and a number of other places around the world. And all the winners presented their ideas in briefings at the United Nations in New York and in the US Congress in Washington, D.C. Now, that's what we've done so far. What we've just started, only a little over a month ago, is a new phase of the project, where instead of having people try to solve the whole problem all at once, we're breaking the problem down into pieces, where different groups of people can work on different parts of the overall problem. One dimension for breaking down the problem is what actions are being done. That can include various ways of reducing emissions in industry and transportation and so forth. It also includes how we might adapt to whatever changes occur, even if we are unable to reduce emissions enough to stop much temperature change. And it may even include various forms of geoengineering as possibilities. It also includes not just things that governments can do, but things that businesses can do, things that other organizations can do, and things that individual people, consumers and citizens all over the world can do. And of course, it includes things that can be done in different places in the world. For instance, we have or soon hope to have sub-contests on topics like what can electric utilities in the world's leading emitting nations do to reduce emissions from generation of power? What can city governments do to adapt to rising sea levels? What social actions could most effectively change cultural attitudes about climate change? So it's not just physical things we're looking at, but also social things. For instance, here's one example of a contest that already exists, focusing on a problem of how to reduce emissions from the cement industry. It turns out that's one of the industries where there's the most potential for emission reduction. We're doing this contest in collaboration with Richard Branson's funded Carbon War Room. And as with all the other contests, this one includes an advisor, typically an expert, many from faculty places like MIT and Stanford, but also other kinds of experts representing different stakeholders that are involved in a particular issue, or people who could actually implement the ideas that come out of the contest in a different area. Each contest also includes what we call a Climate Collab Fellow, often a graduate student or a postdoc, to help coordinate all the activities. And these things can also, we hope to also have people involved who could actually implement the ideas that come out of the different contests. As I said, some of the contests focus on physical actions, like putting insulation in attics. Others focus on social actions, like passing laws or educational programs. And others, like this one, include both physical and social actions.
And this one is on reducing emissions from the manufacture of cement.
Exactly, exactly. Now, once we have all these sub-problems and contests working on different parts of the problem, then of course the question is, how do we know that all those pieces of things will add up to something that actually helps solve the whole problem? How do we know we're not just solving 10% of the problem as opposed to the whole thing? And so we expect next year to have another series of contests that bring together ideas from lots of different sub-proposals into larger integrative proposals at the national and global levels. Now, are we sure that all this work will lead to better solutions to the global climate change problem? No, we're not sure. But our hope is that the Climate Collab will help bring together scientists, policymakers, business people, and many others from all over the world to plan, and also importantly to help gain support for, better climate actions than anything we might ever otherwise have come up with. And we think that is a hope worth working for. Thank you.
Tom, you're proposing collective action and using technology as a way of harnessing collective action. When you do that, do you let individuals off the hook?
Not at all. Not for a number of reasons. One is, of course, it's individuals who are going to be helping, who are going to be participating in all this. So we see this as a way of helping involve many more individuals in our global conversation about this question than would ever otherwise have been possible. Today, the conversation is mostly a conversation among experts perhaps and political leaders. We see this as a way where lots of people who are intelligent and creative and in many cases deeply passionate about these questions, a way that they can inject their own ideas, their own creativity, their own energy into this conversation and have a chance that if they do have good ideas, those can actually rise to the attention of people who can actually do something about it. So one way individuals are involved is as the participants in this global community. The other way is that some of the contests have to do with things individuals can do without any government or business or other involvement.
I'm going to ask, again, keeping track on time, for His Holiness to maybe give us some final words here, and if possible then reflect on what you have said about collective action and trying to use, in this sense, technology to bring lots of great ideas from all over the world in order to create some positive change.
Action level, collective action. The idea of collective data, you only make them get there. That's all the experts
It's wonderful that you're providing this forum for many individuals to come together and join in a collective action. And His Holiness was saying that when we think of action in this kind of context, we by definition actually mean collective action.
But I think the collective, you mean the general public? Yes, among the public, including some scientists, they may come because of the new ideas. Very good. But in any way, that way, I think, provides some kind of sense of responsibility or sense of participation. That's, I think, very important. But the actual sort of the idea must come from experts who spend decades on a particular field. So their knowledge is much better. Like me, I think 100,000 like me, no idea. So realistic,
practical,
realistic sort of approach or idea solutions must come from those experts. I have more sort of faith those experts, individuals, or mainly scientists. I like that. Okay.
Well, thank you all of you for sticking with us and listening to this conversation. I really want to thank our panelists here, Kerry Emanuel, Rebecca Henderson, Penny Chisholm, and Tom Malone, of course. And I also want to thank the Center for Ethics and MIT for hosting us, the translator who did a valiant job there when needed, and Your Holiness, thank you so much for participating.
I think nowadays also you see very much related with the government level. Government level. Governments. So here the collective. That just gives bigger number of people get this sort of serious sort of concern. Then their voice can affect their leaders. But scientists, a very brilliant scientist, but one single person, they may not sort of concern much. Of course. That they may concern seriously number. So I think in order to influence or impact the politicians or leaders, I think they just use a movement. I think you're useful.
And
that's my view.
And the notion was to involve and include the political establishment within that conversation as well, as a way of creating action for the ideas that are there. Again, I want to thank all of you for participating today. I really appreciate it. And I must say, having participated in many, many panels about climate change, this one did not leave me entirely depressed. And I feel like our panelists did a great job of giving us some sense of hope. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I also would like to give my thanks for a very interesting talk. His Holiness will leave the stage. I would appreciate if everyone could stay at their seats, and I'll have a couple announcements just after he leaves the stage. Thank you.
Really, the experts' presentations were wonderful. Take out the new movies. Afternoon, okay. Thank you. Thank you. See you again. You come. Do something. Oh. Wonderful.